Welcome to part 3 of my review in progress for Final Fantasy XIV. For this review, it will accompany the epilogue of Heavensward into the expansion of Stormblood and up to the credits roll of Stormblood, but not include the epilogue of Stormblood. Without further ado, let's just get right into it. For Final Fantasy XIV Stormblood, this expansion in particular, I'm actually a bit out of odds with this, and it comes down to two reasons: gameplay versus story. So from the gameplay perspective, Stormblood is a significant step up above Heavensward. Essentially, everything from the game's art design to the acting to the musical score, everything takes a step forward. Even the game's cutscenes. The cutscenes are really elevated in Stormblood. And all of this leads to a fantastic presentation and a fantastic gameplay experience. They even added a slew of new gameplay mechanics to the gameplay. First and foremost, bosses themselves. They have far more mechanics than they did in previous encounters from the previous expansions and base game. Not only do they have more mechanics, but they stack amongst them on top of each other more and more. So it really requires you, the player, when you go into a boss encounter, to really learn what everything means and how to go about it, because one slip up in some of these bosses, you can really have to restart the encounter because you made a mistake. There is even a boss encounter in Stormblood that you don't even actually fight. It is 3 trials that you have to complete simply by dodging the mechanics and going through it and making sure you're not getting hit with certain items. You actually don't physically fight the boss. It's just passing 3 tests and you beat the boss. So there's a lot of new mechanics within the bosses themselves, and the boss encounters, as always, are fantastic. The bosses are very well designed. It's a lot of fun to take down a big boss, and everything about the encounter is a blast and a step up from what came before. So is the general combat. But outside of the boss encounters, there's other mechanics. There's a mechanic where you're doing a stealth mission, essentially, and you have to use a blow dart to knock out guards for you to progress. They added underwater swimming, where you can now go into deep water and go underwater to reach other unknown destinations. So these are things that all added to make the gameplay of Stormblood a significant step up from Heavensward and the base game, and it really draws it in. I spoke earlier about the art style of this expansion, and that is no more on display than the city of Kugani. The Kugani city, it can be described as like Final Fantasy in Japan. And maybe this is me as someone who loves the Japanese culture. This was the best part of the expansion for me, was this city. The city's art design and the way it was colors and everything about it, it spoke really well to me and it stood out throughout my time with this expansion. The other issue which comes with this expansion, as I said at the beginning, is the story. So while Stormblood elevates everything it came before from a gameplay perspective, it is a major step back, at least for me, when it comes to the game's narrative story. Now, I'm not going to dive into the specificities because I don't want to spoil, but essentially what it comes down to is Stormblood's story is a political tale. And how you feel about the politics is really going to determine how you enjoy Stormblood. Coming from Heavensward, where it's less about politics and more about apocalyptic and survival, this is all political. So it's either going to jive with you or it's not. It's a really hit or miss. My colleague who I've been talking to about Final Fantasy, who got me to go play this, he loved Stormblood. He absolutely says it's his favorite one. He loved the political aspect of it. But for somebody like me, I hated it. And from my looking around and talking to other players of the Final Fantasy community, it seems to be that this is the case with this expansion. You either love it or you hate it. And for me, from the narrative standpoint, I absolutely hated it. I thought it was very slow. I thought it was very uninteresting. I could care less about the politics. And for me, all of this, plus its pacing, really felt like a step back from Heavensward. Because Heavensward, it's like balls to the wall from beginning to end, and the story goes at a very good pace. Whereas in Stormblood, the pace is really slow at the beginning and middle section. It only really picks up in the very end of the expansion. We're talking when you're doing quests that are level like 68 of 70. And that's when things are really getting good from a narrative perspective. But anything prior to that, it is a slog. So much so that at times I felt like quitting because I was so disinterested in the story. And it's sad, but I powered through it because the gameplay was fun. I still enjoy the gameplay, and the gameplay is what saved it for me. Because everything outside of watching cutscenes or reading the dialogue and going through the story kind of really bored me. But everything else, from roaming the world, doing dungeons, fighting bosses, all of this stuff was great. So for me, a gameplay perspective, Stormblood was amazing. From a narrative perspective, it was pretty bad. So overall, I somewhat enjoyed my time with Stormblood, but it really wasn't the greatest experience in terms of a story. And for that, I personally have to dock a few points because it really, really slogged for me. Overall, I'm giving Stormblood expansion a 7 out of 10. This is part 3 of the review. Part 4 will cover the epilogue as well as Shadowbringers, which I am told is the best expansion, so I'm looking forward to that. This is Veteran Gamer, and I hope to see you guys next time.